Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cheryl Godbout, and I'm the managing partner here at Cloverdale. And I want to thank all of you for coming to take this brief time to remember and to pay honor to those people that have gone before we get busy and start enjoying our Christmas season the way they would want us to. So I'm just going to read a brief piece that I think tells what this is all about and why we're here. The Christmas luminary candles. We are here tonight to remember our loved ones by the display of candles in their memory. The light of the flame has always been symbolic to the human world. The eternal flame stands for the remembrance of those gone before. The light of those candles has come to represent rebirth and renewal. These two meanings are incorporated in the Christmas luminary candles on display here this evening. These lights signify the ever-present love and memory of those no longer with us, which will always live on in our hearts. We all have holes in our lives because our loved ones are gone, but we are thankful that we can come together to remember, and in doing so, find hope and healing in sharing. Now, before I kind of forget at the end, I want to let everyone know that when the service concludes, we have a table out in the foyer that has ornaments for you to take home with you as a remembrance of this evening. There's also some literature there on help during the holidays in case anyone needs some reading materials. And best of all, I'm going to walk next door to our reception center where we have some refreshments for you to enjoy. And our staff has put together a really good array of really good stuff. So don't miss out on that. So let's continue on with our service.
All these pieces broken Thank you very much, gentlemen. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Redford. I'm privileged to serve as a pastor in our community and often also have the privilege of walking alongside families in celebrating their loved ones and remembering them and giving God thanks for them. I want to say what a privilege it is for me to be able to join you this evening as we stopped in the midst of the very busy and hectic season to slow down long enough to recognize the reality that each one of us are walking through and experiencing some kind of loss together. And as we go and think about lighting candles tonight, as we go to do that this evening, we're recognizing that. We're remembering that in the midst of everything else that's happening, there's a part of our heart that isn't quite complete today. We're taking time to remember. We're taking time to give thanks. And we're also making a couple of other important statements, I think, by being here. We're saying that we know our need to keep moving forward. And we're saying we know our need to be connected and to be with others. Tonight, you've chosen to come here and be among other people who've also experienced loss. And so I just invite you throughout the evening as you look around and notice other people, would you simply recognize the importance of the fact that none of us are alone in the process of grief and working through that. As a meditation for this evening, I want to read some words to you from John chapter 16. And I've chosen these because they are words of comfort, but I think what you'll also notice as I read them is that they're also words of a very straightforward nature. Jesus said in John chapter 16, "I tell you the truth, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices." I don't know if you've ever noticed those words in Scripture, but isn't that true? You will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. In some way, the world just doesn't stop to allow us the time for grief. He said, you will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. And he offered this illustration to explain that. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will be able to take your joy away. Christ, as he speaks about trials, is very honest with us about the reality of voids in life, the reality of losses that we experience. And I'm so thankful for that. I personally am very thankful that a biblical faith doesn't tempt us to somehow pretend that life is all well, when many times it's full of heartache and loss. And at the same time, Christ not only validates our pain, he points and helps us to see beyond our pain and loss toward hope for the future. You were given a candle as you walked in, and we'll take time tonight to light those candles. As has been mentioned, light is an important symbol of renewal. It's such an important symbol of hope. A few years ago, the church that I pastor lost a very dear member among us. He was only 50 years old. His name was Rod. And he was not only a wonderfully faithful member, but he was a very close personal friend of mine. He was subjected to a brutal ordeal the last 8 months of his life of cancer and, of course, repeated treatments of radiation and chemotherapy. But what I remember the most about Rod is not so much the pain that he went through. It's that he had a tremendous faith, even till his last day. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I would often try to encourage him, and he would end up encouraging me instead. He was always so concerned about the well-being of everyone else around him. To me, he was a light of hope in the midst of undeniable darkness. Something I remember Rod would say, because he said it many times. He said, a person can live about 40 days without food, about 3 days without water, about 8 minutes without air, but only 1 second without hope. And he lived that. And I've often thought about that in times when hope seems more difficult to hang on to. Faith is a process of hoping for a brighter future. But at the same time, faith isn't an invitation to deny the reality of darkness around us right now. Jesus said very honestly, you will grieve. I want to contrast the words of Scripture that I've offered here with what I think is a very normal way that people just very commonly deal with grief and losses. John James and Frank Cherry, in their book on grief recovery, trace the story of a boy named Johnny. When 5-year-old Johnny's dog dies, Johnny is stunned and he bursts out crying. His dog was his constant companion. It slept at the foot of his bed. But now the dog is gone, and little Johnny is quite emotional. Johnny's dad stammers a bit. He's very uncomfortable. And he says, don't feel bad, Johnny. We'll get you a new dog on Saturday. And in that one sentence, Johnny's dad is offering the first 2 steps of society's grief management program. Bury your feelings and replace your losses. Once you have the new dog, you won't even think about the old dog anymore. Fast forward. Later, when Johnny falls in love with a high school freshman girl, well, now his world's never seemed brighter until she dumps him. Suddenly, a curtain covers the sun. Johnny's heart is broken. And this time, it's big-time hurt. This is a person his heart was fixed on. John is a wreck. But Mom comes to the rescue this time and says with great sensitivity, don't feel bad, John. There are other fish in the sea. Bury the pain, replace the loss. Johnny has steps 1 and 2 down pat by now, and he'll use these tools for the rest of his life. Much later, John's grandfather dies, the one that he fished with every summer, the one that he felt so close to. A note was slipped to him in math class. He read the note about his grandpa, and he couldn't fight off the tears. He broke down sobbing right there in the classroom at his desk. The teacher felt uncomfortable about it and sent him off to the school office to grieve alone. When John's father brought him home from school, John saw his mother weeping in the living room, and he wanted to embrace her and cry with her, but his dad said, don't disturb her, John. She needs to be alone. She'll be all right in a little while, and then the 2 of you can talk. The third piece of the grief puzzle was now making sense to John. Grieve alone. So he went to his room to cry alone, and he felt a very deep sense of loneliness. And these, I think, really are our unspoken rules of grief. Bury feelings, replace losses, grieve alone, and to go on, let time heal, live perhaps with regret, never trust again. And if all that sounds familiar, it's because it's been society's approach for years. It's the way left to our own wisdom we naturally grieve. But I want to say this. We're here tonight to remind each other, even simply by being present here, that there's a different way through loss, a better way even through the holidays and the busyness of this time around us. I see that in several ways. Today's gathering here goes against the grain of an unhealthy grief process. We're gathered today as a way of saying we recognize the reality of losses. We're not denying that we're incomplete here this evening, that our loss is real. And rather than grieving alone or somehow preventing our hearts from hoping again, we're here tonight to acknowledge that loss and to remember on purpose the good things about our loved ones that have passed on. We're here to find strength and hope from one another. See, faith is a process of hopeful waiting, trusting God to care for us and lead us forward. Today is a day in Advent season, leading to Christmas is a time for creating this kind of sacred space in our lives, to step aside from the hurry and the busyness, the clutter of life, long enough to remember that we are loved. I wonder, when you walked into this room, did you appreciate, as I did, just the serene sense of this environment. It's relaxing. There's so many other things that are going on at this time of life. We've come on purpose to slow down. And I really think that we come to appreciate things by contrast in our lives. The busier we are and the noisier life is, the more we appreciate a quiet sanctuary and a time to rest. It so often is the case that we don't fully appreciate something until it's gone. I know that's true with our jobs, our abilities, our health. We perhaps don't fully appreciate companionship until we also know the reality of loneliness. We appreciate heat in freezing weather. And we don't fully know comfort unless we know grief as well. So here in this room are candles. And the reason I think that candles are so attractive is because they are brighter than any other brightness in this room. If you think about it, it takes a darker contrast in order to appreciate the light. In a strange way, darkness creates room for light. Our grief provides the background for the recognition of how very important hope is, how very important comfort is, and the gift of one another that we so desperately need. Christmas, of course, is the celebration of light in the world. Have you ever noticed that Christmas happens in our part of the world to be during the darkest time of the whole year? The winter solstice, December 21st, the shortest day of the year. I guess that's good in terms of appreciating Christmas lights a few hours longer during the day, but it's a tough time. In celebrating Christmas, faith, instead of denying cold and dark realities, it remembers light in the very presence of darkness, companionship in the midst of coldness, the presence of hope born into a world that truly needs it. So my prayer for you is that you will find the reality of light and of hope this season, that you'll find room there for the peace of God to be born. You hold in your hand a wick, and that wick is a little piece of receptivity. It's waiting for light. I wonder if our hearts would be open and would be receptive to allowing hope to be born. Let me ask it this way. Is there room in your heart this Christmas? Just over 100 years ago, George Bernard Shaw invented a society for the abolition of Christmas. Did you know that? For him, Christmas was simply a nuisance. We can go along with that a little bit. Green and red before Halloween just isn't right. Supported by the mob as a carnival of gluttony. But after years of campaigning, Mr. Shaw had to admit that his society was a failure. So far, he wrote, I'm the only member. So he gave up. Could I contrast that with this sweet story? Wally was 9 when asked to participate in the school's Christmas pageant. He was the innkeeper. After many rehearsals, the long-awaited event occurred. Joseph and Mary came to the inn, and there was Wally, standing with the door with his lantern. What do you want? He asked. We seek lodging, replied Joseph. Go elsewhere. The inn is full. But, sir, we've asked everywhere in vain. We've traveled far and are very weary. Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife, heavy with child. You must have some small corner for her. Wally now looked down on Mary with pity. But the prompter called to Wally, go on with your lines. There's no room in the inn. So Wally continued, there's no room here. Be gone. Go on your way. And at this point, Joseph sadly placed his arms around Mary. Mary laid her head upon his shoulder, and the two started to move slowly away. Wally stood there in the doorway, watching the forlorn couple with obvious concern and with a tear trickling down his cheek. And suddenly, the Christmas pageant became different from all others. Don't go, Joseph! Wally called out, bring Mary back! And Wally's face lit up with a bright smile. You can have my room. His tender heart had made room for the birth of hope. I'm thankful that each of you have chosen to be here tonight, to make room in your hearts for joy, for hope. And it is our prayer that you experience the tender beauty and the meaning of this Christmas season. We get to hear 2 more songs from our men's quartet, and we thank you very much for singing.
Your baby boy has come to make you new. This child that you deliver will soon deliver you. Mary, did you know that your baby boy will give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy will calm a storm with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? When you kissed your little baby, then you kiss the face of God. The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dead will live again. The lame will leap, the dumb will speak, the praises of the Lamb. Mary, did you know that your baby boy is Lord of all creation? Mary, did you know that your baby boy will one day rule the nations? Did you know that your baby boy was heaven's perfect lamb? The sleeping child you're holding is the great I am.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we see the flame that represents all of those people that have gone before us, that still remain with us as long as we remember them, keep the light and the hope in your hearts during this holiday season and throughout the year to come. At this point, let's extinguish our flames. And our staff will collect the candles from you. And then Mr. Ross, who's opened the doors to your left, will lead you over to our reception center for some refreshments and some fellowship. Thank you so much for coming.